To discuss Ukraine and the International Monetary Fund, Michael Hudson is on the show. Michael is a distinguished research professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and the president of the Institute for the Study of Long-Term Economic Trends. The Ukrainian economy is in a free fall with base interest rates at 30% and inflation at 34.5% through February of 2015. So Edward first asked him to explain the latest numbers, and here's what he had to say.
Well, as you say, it's in a free flow. The kleptocrats are taking all their money and running. They're sending it abroad. The Ukraine is spending, obviously, most of its money on war. People of working age are fleeing the country to avoid the draft. Either they're fleeing eastward into Russia, or they're going west into Poland, hoping to get into the rest of Europe. So Ukraine is emptying out its economy because it's the most corrupt economy in the northern hemisphere, to make a long story short.
Well, now, what about currency reserves? My understanding is that one of the biggest problems for Ukraine is liquidity. They have a paucity of foreign currency reserves to draw on, less than $6 billion, and that makes the situation very serious. Does this weaken Ukraine's bargaining position vis-a-vis the IMF and other creditors?
No, it strengthens it enormously because it says we're so broke that if we go under, we're going to be a failed state and Russia will take over. So the kleptocrats are purposely emptying out all the money, and now they're going to the West, and they have a wonderful position. They can say, give us all the money, and we promise to sell you all of our land, our raw materials, our real estate, our natural resources, our gas rights. The only way that they can repay their debts is to sell off everything they have to American investors and to European investors. And so by being poor, they say, you see, we have no choice. Give us money and you can rape us.
You know, there are a lot of different ways I'm going to go from here, but let me first ask you, because I'm going to have a few follow-ups here. I've heard a figure of about $40 billion of potential loan amounts from all the potential creditors, with the IMF contributing $17 billion. Where else besides the IMF can Ukraine receive funds?
Well, George Soros has said he'd like to come in and go into partnership with the kleptocrats, and he and them will loot the country in common, splitting the profit. So there's a lot of Western money that can come in to work with the thieves that are running the country.
Now, you know, the IMF is prohibited from making loans to countries at war. That would suggest to me, at least, that the Ukrainian government sees the current ceasefire as a high priority since they need the funds. Is that right?
Well, Ukraine did promise to stop the war for 24 hours while it gets the loan and then go right back. But there's an even more serious problem with the IMF. It's not allowed to make loans to countries that are insolvent. As you pointed out at the beginning of the introduction, Ukraine is insolvent. There is no possible way that it can repay the loan except by privatizing and selling off all of its property to foreigners. Now, this is very interesting. If the IMF can't make loans to countries at war, and if it can't make loans to countries that can repay, if there's ever a Ukrainian version of Greece's Syriza party there, they can say, look, this loan was given under illegal pretenses. It is null and void under international law. We don't have to repay a penny. And by the way, we're retaking all of the property that they've given away.
Right. Now, what will the IMF require of Ukraine in order to meet the requirements under an IMF program?
Its directors will have to be taken out for lunch by the U.S. Treasury and the Defense Department and given a lot of free lunches, and promises that when they leave the IMF, they'll have very high-paying jobs on Wall Street.
Well, do you think that despite the hit in the medium term that the IMF could help put the country in a sustainable course, or is this just one big asset strip?
Look, the IMF's job isn't to help countries. It's to empty out countries. It's to impose austerity and to force countries to sell off everything. It's not there to help. It's there to help the West, the creditors, not the debtors.
Well, you know, Michael, you already made the case, and I had a question for you before. And what I was going to say is that some people make a case that in both Ukraine and in Greece, the IMF, in violation of its rules, has loaned money to countries that are bankrupt. cannot possibly pay. Now, first of all, I think I already know the answer because you already said this. Do you think that's true in the case of not just Ukraine, but also Greece? And if so, why is the IMF doing this in both cases?
Well, the IMF staff itself said that this is true. It's the 2013 annual meetings in Washington. You had them coming right out and saying that the IMF forecasts were a joke. The Wall Street Journal summarized a 50-page internal paper on Greece. And the Latin American directors came out and said, look, the IMF is just coming up with fictitious reports. And just last week, a number of Latin American directors of the IMF once again came out and said, look, its forecasts are just made on junk economics. So obviously what's happened is, a little beknown to the press, the IMF has actually moved its offices into the Pentagon with a branch office on Wall Street and is just doing whatever the U.S. tells it to.
So basically, you're saying that there are political reasons for them to do this, even though they know full well that these countries can't repay in full.
Well, that's why the IMF was created, for political reasons.
Now, what is the situation in Greece at the moment from what you're seeing?
It's very bad because the Europeans are trying to make an object lesson of Greece. They worry that if Syriza manages to write down the debts that Greece owes, that all of a sudden this will enable Podemos in Spain, Italy, Portugal, and other countries to say, wait a minute, we can't pay our debts either. We've got to write them down. So they're trying to make Greece an object lesson and treat it pretty much like America would treat Cuba or Iran or North Korea. They're trying to absolutely crush it. They want to bring back the colonels. They want to bring back the right wing and say, you see, the left can't do anything. Bring back the right and start privatizing your property again.
Well, you know, obviously they could be successful in doing that because, you know, with QE in the midst here, we're also getting a dividend from the fact that oil prices are going so low. Clearly, they're going to be able to say in Spain, for instance, look, you guys, you've towed the line, therefore you're getting the benefit, don't vote for Podemos. Do you think that they're going to be successful in doing that?
Nobody can tell right now. I think that Varoufakis and also Jamie Galbraith, who's negotiating with them, are the best possible negotiators that they could have. I think they're doing everything that's reasonable. The question is how intransigent the Germans and the Europeans are going to be. Germany has set its sight on grabbing Greece's electrical system. It already owns 40% of the electrical utility. It set its sight on smashing Greece and buying out what it can in a smash and grab operation. And the question is, can this succeed, or can Varoufakis and Syriza find some way of going it alone, or will they be driven into going back to the drachma?